We've got a fantastic panel here to talk about a really complex issue for schools and for young people and for families. Often, I think there's probably many teachers in the room and principals who feel that they're in a really hard place when it comes to how do we prevent and how do we respond effectively to bullying, and how do we engage with our communities positively and effectively to get some good responses. So we are today really launching the Bullying No Way, which has now turned into a week, which is August the 12th to the 16th this year. Queensland, I don't know if everyone knows, but Queensland, I feel like decades ago, made eye contact in a national environment and became the state that leads the Bullying No Way project, which has never ended and keeps on going. And I have to say, I've met many principals and teachers who say to me, no, I use the Bullying No Way website. I love those resources. And my team over here continues to keep on evolving that website as a resource based on your feedback, your participation. So we're launching the campaign here today, and we've got a panel of experts on stage, luckily for me, to talk to us about this issue. I don't think Dr. Simonson needs any introduction. I think many of us have had the pleasure of listening to Brandy and hear about her research, and certainly given me a few light bulb moments. Brandy is the Professor of Special Education at the University of Connecticut. We're also joined by Zoe Mulgard. Zoe puts all this into action as the Deputy Principal of Inclusive Education at Tagai State College, which I must say has been all over the PBL conference this week, and so it's very exciting. So Zoe's got a lot of practical stuff to talk to us about. And I actually think our third panel member might be the true expert. Kayana is a Year 12 student at Innisfail State College, and she's joining us today. And she's also, very importantly, a member of the National Student Voice Council, which I think is pretty new, Kayana.
Yeah, we started last year.
And so it's comprised of state and territory students who are representatives of all school sectors, and the council provides information, consultation and co-design advice to education ministers across Australia. It's a really important process for us to hear the voice of children and young people. So I've got a couple of questions to get the ball rolling. So Brandy, how does belonging in a school community help students feel safe and prevent bullying? And what does the research say that schools should be doing, could be doing? What's their role in preventing bullying?
So this is a really easy question because it's coming at the end of this conference. So everything that we have been talking about is the answer to that question, right? It's how we create communities that involve our students, involve our educators, involve our families in defining shared norms, shared values, in teaching those explicitly to set everybody up for success, in celebrating as we approximate those values and eventually as we exceed those values in different ways, and responding instructionally when there are mistakes made. So I sometimes struggle a little bit with the concept of bullying because I think, at least in the States, it's often used as a way to label students or to other people, but really it's just a series of behaviors that aren't consistent with our values. And so one of the most effective ways that we can prevent that behavior is by teaching really explicitly how we engage with our values and teaching students a response if their peers are not. There are free resources that talk about how to prevent bullying through teaching respect. So teaching students how to engage with their community norm, teaching them how to respond if someone doesn't, so that they can provide a stop response, how to walk away or help a peer walk away if they are not being heard and the peer is not stopping, and then when to tell a grown-up. And so it's a whole approach that prevents bullying without ever mentioning the word bullying. It is all framed around the values or the norms of the school.
Yes, absolutely. The thing that's always challenging then is how do we respond to that community, the simplistic response, which is bullying is one thing and there's one answer. Everyone does taekwondo or something like that, and that's our answer. We just need to do that anti-bullying, the program. That's a very difficult interaction, Zoe, which I think schools, as a deputy principal, you've probably had that conversation, that it's a really complex situation. So how do you put what Brandy said into action in a very remote school and a really diverse school?
Well, we're really lucky, and I had to fact check this morning with one of my colleagues. we're really lucky in our 17 campuses. Bullying isn't too much of a concern for us, and I think it's because our children are part of their school community, they're part of their broader community, and every single person within that community belongs and is part of that. I think your question though, for us, it's around helping people define what bullying is versus what teasing is, and putting it in its place, and teaching the skills a child needs to be able to not engage in bullying behaviour, teaching them those core values of having empathy and having kindness to others.
And Kiana, now would it surprise you that the person most organised on this panel is the Year 12 student? It didn't surprise me at all. I'm like, yep, of course she is. So Kiana has actually been talking to her fellow students and doing some consultation about, well, what does bullying mean and what do students want to see? So Kiana's got a little presentation for us, I think. Do you want to take us through it, Kiana?
Thank you. So as was said before, I am a member of the National Student Voice Council, so I had 2 questions presented to me, and they were taken away and given to these 32 students throughout Australia, and I have put together the feedback that I have received. So these 2 questions were what needs to exist in schools to create a safe and inclusive place where students feel they belong, and how can schools actively involve students in the development and the implementation of strategies to promote belonging. So this boils down to the what and the how. So the what, the feedback that was received was more communication needs to occur between students, between teachers, anonymous, discreet, confidential support groups, just to create that safe environment, that safe spot where these students can go, where they feel like they are heard, they are valued, and their opinions matter and they belong. Also creating those safe environments, making sure that inclusivity in schools is present, making sure that sense of belonging is there, and that our leaders, whether that be staff or students, also reach out and they make sure that everyone feels included and everyone feels like they belong. Also had a very good point to make from someone who had a physical disability. He gave some feedback, and his feedback was that we need to make sure that there's accessibility for those people with disabilities, just to make sure that they're not being pinpointed because they can't get to a certain spot. There needs to be accessible pathways, and he also said that inadequate transport during excursions or sporting carnivals, and making sure that we're keeping them in mind when we're planning anything. He can't participate because of his disability that he has no control over. That can lead to bullying as well, and these students are seeking an equal opportunity to participate, and they thrive in the education system. He also just mentioned that inclusivity creates a sense of belonging and promotes academic success. So in order to make sure that the kids are getting the best possible learning experience in the classroom, they also need to make sure that their bullying experience isn't happening. They are not getting pinpointed for what they are or what's happened outside of the classroom. And then the how. So the consequences need to happen if bullying arises, and whether that be through PBL, like we've just been hearing, there needs to be a difference between a zero tolerance policy and actively enforcing that. Students know what we can get away with. We know if you're just saying you've got a policy but not actually acting upon it. There needs to be an enforcement where there will be something happened if that bullying takes place, if bystanders are present. We need to remove the snitches get stitches attitude that is become very prevalent in the past years. Student co-design programs and initiatives need to be led by students, just to bring together students from cultural backgrounds that have different attitudes and values and beliefs, so that we can make sure that every student feels like they belong and they have a voice. And then student-led forums as well, just to make sure that that communal spirit is present in the school. And then Again, from our fellow with the disability that's given our feedback, he says, show students that they matter and are valued, and create a culture of empathy and acceptance, and again, establish those focus groups or surveys led by students. And making sure that students with disabilities and with disadvantages are able to fully participate in all aspects of school life. So, what can you do? It starts in the classroom, and I understand that there is a lot going on in a classroom for teachers, a lot that you have to think about. But a safe classroom where everyone matters and everyone is included is what needs to happen to create that foundation for later years. In our primary schools, we need to include everyone, every day, in everything, no matter what it is. We need to enforce and encourage inclusivity and call those people out through PBL that are being bullies, and educate again about how we can stop that bullying. And in high school, our student leaders need to be chosen as well through their inclusivity and through making sure that they're able to stand up and make the change and keep moving forwards with this, and to create that space where everyone belongs.
Well, thank you, Cleanna. I have to say, so, the power of student voice. You know, students naturally are actually saying exactly what Brandy said, exactly what Zoe said about their experience. So I've got a couple of questions I'm going to follow up. One is about social media. So that's like a really big thing in this space of bullying, and you know, we get a lot of responses from us, you know, old people going, yep, no, evil, never ever go near it again, except all the old people are on Facebook, because that's who's on Facebook, is my understanding, Cleanna. So I'm really interested about what you think about that kind of very blanket, black and white, no, it's bad response. I feel like it's here to stay. What do you think?
I feel like social media does have a time and a place, but again, it can lead to that bullying and that platform where behind a closed door, anyone can be anything. And sometimes that guilt may follow you, sometimes it doesn't, because nobody knows who you've been bullying, how you've been bullying, even if you are being bullied, if you are the victim. There is a time where social media can help prevent bullying and create awareness, but then again, it can also spread bullying.
And so it's really, it's very challenging for young people. You know, you're really the first generation, I think, coming through who've had a life that's really not obvious all the time to their families or to other support networks around them. You know, I grew up in the time where the phone was in the hallway. So my 5 brothers could hear me talking on the phone. So it was really clear what was going on. And something might have happened at school, and I came home, and home was really separate. Social media makes that different. Brandy, what are you hearing, seeing? What is the research telling you about how do we support our children and young people to get that distance and that break from social media and use it for good?
I do think I've seen schools really effectively think about ways that they're going to approach this, partially by involving their students, because as you pointed out, many of us did not grow up with access to social media, and so our way of thinking about it may not be super relevant or current. The other thing I've seen schools do really effectively is use their approach to teach. So in one of the junior, senior high schools that I work with back in the States, they've created a column in their matrix for online kind of social media communities, and they teach expectations and work with their families to then kind of prompt and reinforce expectations for social media use. It's not perfect, right? Because they're not there to monitor, they can't access all of the behaviors that are happening, but it at least sets up that prevention framework, and then having a way that students can safely report when there are concerns, because it's not obvious to us. So having a way to gather the data to make informed decisions about where we need to intensify or respond differently. So I think, again, not that it's an easy answer, but a lot of the work you all are already doing in PBL can be applied to whatever concerns are raised. It just requires a slight adjustment of how we think about approaching them.
Zoe, what about your experience in a more remote school around this social media challenge?
it's still a thing that we see and hear about. Again, I'm not an expert in any way in social media, but it does come back to that preventative teaching of social skills, resilience, and back to the core skills of core values of empathy and kindness, so that we're working towards a preventative approach versus reactive.
And I was really interested, Kayana, in the couple of concepts around peer safe places, support groups. What do you think, what did that look like when people talked about it with you?
So support groups with peers, even the safe environments. At our school at the moment, we're thinking about setting up a Year 12 group where Year 12s can go and they can have their bit of a downtime during lunch and have a chat. Even that with our other junior students as well as senior students in larger schools where that would work. And again, our guidance officers and our guidance counsellors, their rooms are a safe spot that needs to be advertised out to students. And student forums where students can come together, or student activities, student-led groups, where students can come together and have that sense of community spirit no matter what their cultural background is, just to make sure that they are learning those social skills to get along with people in that real life situation, not just on the phone.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That sounds, you've got some pretty good structures in place in your school, and I'm sure we've got lots of people from PBL schools here who I'm sure, build and work really hard every day to have those structures in place so that every student has a trusted adult at some point when they need help that they can reach out to and get support from. How do we prevent almost a demonization, it's a demonization, I guess, of children who are trying to learn themselves how to have relationships and sometimes are not behaving according to our values? And so how do we help all of the adults around those children to actually understand it's pretty normal, this is not a demon child?
Yeah, I do think it's a teaching issue for the adults and some reframing. I mentioned already, I sometimes struggle with bullying focus, not because we shouldn't be preventing it, it's critical for prevention, but I do think it has the potential to other students. How we address behaviors, whether they're one significant behavior concern or a repeated instance, as we often define bullying to be. It's a functional response, right? We're thinking about what are the prevention strategies, if a student needs more targeted support, whether because they are engaging in behavior that we are calling bullying, or whether they're on the receiving end of it and need more effective social skills to respond. So we can think about a targeted response. When we have students with persistent or challenging concerns, we have function-based support. We can pull students into that process. So I actually think a lot of the science is how we do it. Helping people, not other children, I think is a large part of the conversation, and training around how behaviors are functional. We engage in behaviors that have worked for us in the past. If we're continuing to engage in them, they are continuing to work for us. So we're creating more effective environments to allow students to learn the skills that are consistent with our norms. That was a maybe long answer.
No, a fantastic answer. And I guess, Zoe, in that sort of practical sense, what are the things, those immediate kind of things you think when a teacher, a deputy principal like yourself, sees that kind of behaviour, the kind of response you think you need to have in that moment?
I think we need to shift from that idea of applying a consequence, and I think that application of consequence reinforces that concept of otherness, but look instead of that at repairing harm. And we use things like restorative chat and restorative conferencing. There's a process to look at how you repair that harm and own the behaviours that you may have done and identify something to do instead next time you're in that same situation. So I think it's around a shift from that punitive consequence to a way to build skills better for next time.
It's really interesting. I think parents are very hungry for information and support themselves. I know that here in Queensland we introduced at the beginning of this year a Way for the Day mobile phone. What was interesting is we did a little campaign on Instagram, because all of us have a 20-second attention span these days, and that's absolutely fine. And the target initially was, of course, schools, was teachers and principals, and it targeted schools about that this was coming. But then the second month of that campaign, it was parents. And it was the most clicked on campaign that our department had run on Instagram. And people clicked through a couple of times. And it was really around that cyber safety and social media. So I guess I'm interested, Zoe, whether you think there is some way we can better support parents. There's a lot of information out there. Bullying No Way is a great resource. It's got resources for students and parents and schools as well. But there's many other things. So I'm just interested, what's the best way to connect, do you think?
I like the idea of it being done at a local level with schools and in communities. I think that that's really powerful. As a parent and somebody who works in schools.
Kayana, what do you reckon your parents need to understand this modern world?
Again,
they're not here, so feel free. I don't know if anyone knows your parents, but...
Yeah, just those resources and being aware of those social media platforms and those technologies and how they can use them to achieve what they need to achieve, as well as be aware of how to educate their kids. So making sure that we are creating that spot where the children are educated on how to safely use technologies.
Yep, absolutely. Brandy, what do you think?
I was just thinking, my son was on the receiving end of some bullying. He has a life-threatening peanut allergy, and in middle school, some of his friends were going after him with peanut products. And so just from a personal experience, my husband's reaction was how he could punish and go after the quote-unquote bullies, which was the language he chose to use. And I had a moment of that reaction, but then my professional side kicked in, and I thought, this is just an education issue. These are students who think they're being silly and are trying to get and obtain peer attention, and we just need to educate on how to safely do that and how to maintain safety for food allergies. And so I'm sharing that because I think for parents, we have to understand that punishment doesn't teach. At best, it might discourage a behavior, but often it backfires because we use punishers that aren't super effective. And so getting parents to think a little bit like teachers, to think about an instructional response can be really effective, but that would require very consistent messaging.
This is a community issue. So these are sometimes behaviours and values that we bring into the school environment. Schools can't do it alone, and we need to deal with it as a broader community. It's really challenging in how to do that. Brandy, when you went and spoke with your school about it, how was that stepping into that space as a parent, but coming from that teaching perspective?
My school was open to education, so we were able to achieve that. But I do think this raises an important point, and you brought it up as well, is thinking about how different students' backgrounds would have them potentially set up to have different experiences in school. And so when we're looking at our climate data or our outcome data, making sure we're disaggregating it to look at students who identify with disability, students who identify from different racial or ethnic groups, students who identify as LGBTQIA. At least in the States, when we look at our climate data, those groups of students don't have similar experiences in school. And so if we're going to tackle this, I do think it requires an honest and deep dive so that students who might stand out in different ways, we hear from them and we make sure our universal approaches are actually universal and inclusive.
And inclusive being the word, and Kayana, you've used that in your presentation, you know, coming from students that they want to see inclusive environments as well. Well, I just want to thank each of you for participating in the conversation today and answering questions that were not on the list as well, that I just made up. So they've been very accommodating and I really appreciate their participation. So hopefully all schools across the country will participate in the Bullying No Way Week of Action, August 12th to 16th. If you've never been to the Bullying No Way website, please trot along and have a look at those resources. We're always keen to get feedback to know how we can do things better. I certainly know that here in Queensland we're lighting up landmarks, I think, that are purple and doing a whole range of things to talk about this issue openly so that we can all work together, because clearly when we listen to our experts here, that's actually how we'll make a difference, is by talking about this, raising awareness about it, demystifying it, and really understanding that this is a community issue. Schools are really important in responding and helping children and young people to learn the skills they need to be successful and those social emotional skills. But it is actually about the whole community working together. And so that whole collaborative co-design world that we certainly see coming out of schools like Tagai are really important for the future, and making sure that we do have school environments and communities where we all belong. So thanks very much for your time, and thank you to the panel.